In 1996, Russian scientists confirmed something extraordinary beneath Antarctica's ice. A lake, not a frozen pocket, but liquid water. Vast, pristine, untouched for millions of years. Lake Vostok sits 2.5 miles below the surface, larger than Lake Ontario, sealed off from the world since before humans walked upright. The Russians began drilling, slowly, carefully, year after year, getting closer to that hidden water, planning to break through, to see what survived down there in the dark. Then, just hundreds of feet from breakthrough, they stopped drilling, officially explained as environmental concerns, contamination protocols, scientific caution. But what if that's not the full story?
A glaciologist who worked at Vostok Station, he only identified himself as Dmitry, spoke to a science journalist years after leaving Antarctica. He described the atmosphere during the final drilling season. Quiet tension among the crew, instructions changing daily, equipment arriving that wasn't on the manifest. "We were told we'd break through that season," Dmitry said. "Everything was ready. Then people started showing up who weren't scientists, military personnel, Russian officials with no stated purpose. Americans too, despite Vostok being a Russian station." Dmitry remembered one night specifically. The drill had reached deeper than ever. They were pulling up core samples, examining the ice for any sign they were close to liquid water. One of the samples came up different. The ice was wrong, he said. Cloudy, with dark inclusions we couldn't identify. Not sediment, not rock. Something organic. They sent it for analysis. Within hours, communications protocols changed. Certain conversations were no longer allowed on open channels. Data transmission became restricted. "We asked what they found in the sample," Dmitry said. "No one would tell us. They just said to keep drilling." Then, less than a week later, the order came down. Stop. Not pause. Stop. Dr. John Priscu was an American microbiologist who consulted on the Vostok project. He'd studied extremophile organisms, life that survives in impossible conditions. He believed Lake Vostok could harbor unique biology, ancient life forms sealed away for millennia. In interviews after the drilling halt, Priscu chose his words carefully. He mentioned procedural concerns, international agreements about contamination, the need for better sterilization technology. But colleagues noticed he stopped talking about the project altogether, declined further interviews. When pressed, he'd redirect to other research. A technician who maintained the drilling equipment, he never gave his name publicly, posted once on a scientific forum. He described working overnight shifts during the final season. The drill descent logs showed something unusual: resistance changes, unexpected voids, moments where the equipment behaved like it was passing through something that wasn't just ice. He wrote, "The readings didn't make sense, like there were pockets down there, cavities that shouldn't exist at that pressure." He also mentioned the cameras, downhole imaging equipment that was supposed to document the descent. He wrote, "The footage that could have shown us what was down there is gone. Classified. We were told it malfunctioned, but I saw the monitors. It was working fine." The post was deleted within days.
The official timeline makes less sense the closer you look at it. Drilling began in the early 90s. Progress was steady, predictable. Core samples came up regularly, each one analyzed and cataloged. The scientific papers published during this period described normal glacial ice. Ancient, yes, but unremarkable. Then, as the drill approached the lake, publications stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The last peer-reviewed paper about Vostok drilling appeared years before the halt. After that, only vague press releases, brief statements about environmental protocols, nothing specific. Documents obtained through years of requests reveal gaps in the core sample logs, sections marked under analysis with no follow-up reports, samples listed as inconclusive or damaged during extraction. For those who remember when the government said Agent Orange was safe, this pattern is familiar. International agreements about Antarctic drilling were invoked, the 1991 Madrid Protocol, which prohibits environmental harm. Russian officials cited it as the reason for stopping, but the protocol had been in place for years before Vostok drilling began. Every mission was designed with contamination prevention in mind. The sudden concern felt reactionary, like something changed. Correspondence between Russian and American scientific agencies shows unusual coordination during the final drilling season, joint meetings, shared data protocols, a level of cooperation that seemed disproportionate for an environmental precaution. One memo references biological considerations without elaboration. Another discusses strategic implications of continuing versus halting operations. The language shifted from scientific to governmental, from discovery to containment. Satellite imagery of Vostok Station during this period shows increased activity, more flights, more personnel, construction of new facilities that weren't part of the original research station. When questioned about it, Russian officials said they were upgrading infrastructure, improving living conditions for the crew. But the timing aligned perfectly with the drilling halt. Something changed down there, in the ice, in the water, in whatever they were approaching. And someone decided the risk of finding it. It's not that they stopped drilling because of environmental protocol. It's that they invoked environmental protocol to justify stopping.
Lake Vostok itself is the anomaly. The water shouldn't be liquid. At that depth, under miles of ice, the pressure and cold should freeze everything solid, but geothermal heat from below keeps it melted. A hidden ocean in complete darkness, isolated for over 15 million years. Radar mapping shows the lake is massive, roughly 160 miles long, deeper than most surface lakes. The water temperature hovers just above freezing, sustained by heat from Earth's core. But the radar also shows something else: magnetic anomalies, concentrated zones where readings spike without explanation, not random, clustered, near the southern end of the lake, where the water is deepest. Geological features don't usually create magnetic signatures like that. Neither does ice or water. The drilling itself left physical evidence. Core samples stored in Russian facilities contain the record of descent. Ice from different depths, each layer representing thousands of years. The deepest samples, those pulled just before the halt, reportedly showed biological material, not bacteria, something larger, cellular structures that didn't match known organisms. These samples were never published, never displayed at conferences, never made available for independent analysis. They exist in cold storage somewhere, classified, inaccessible. Photographs taken at Vostok Station during the final drilling season show equipment that doesn't appear in earlier documentation. Large cylindrical containers, sealed transport units, vehicles designed for material that requires containment. One image, archived by a researcher before it was removed from public databases, shows personnel in full biohazard suits near the drill site. Environmental precaution, perhaps, or something else. The lake's eastern shore, if you can call the ice ceiling a shore, shows unusual seismic activity. Subtle tremors recorded by instruments monitoring ice stability. The tremors don't match tectonic patterns. They're rhythmic, almost cyclic,
like something moving in the water below. The drill hole itself remains, sealed now, filled with drilling fluid to prevent it from freezing closed. But it's still there, 2.5 miles deep, stopping just short of the lake, a monument to how close we came and how abruptly we turned back.
The simplest explanation is biological. Lake Vostok represents an isolated ecosystem. Whatever evolved there did so without contact with the surface world for millions of years. Organisms adapted to crushing pressure, total darkness, and near freezing water. If they found life in those final core samples, unusual life, aggressive life, infectious life, stopping makes sense. Contamination works both ways. Bringing something up from Vostok could introduce pathogens Earth's biosphere has no defense against. For those who remember when scientists assured us Chernobyl was contained, caution around unknown biology seems reasonable. But this theory assumes the concern was contamination. What if it was something else? The magnetic anomalies suggest infrastructure. Not natural formations, something built or deposited intentionally. During the Cold War, both superpowers explored Antarctica extensively. Bases were established, research conducted that was never fully disclosed. The continent became a testing ground for survival technology, deep ice drilling, and who knows what else. What if Vostok isn't just a lake? What if it's a repository, buried there deliberately, sealed under ice where no one would look, where nothing could escape? A Cold War cache of biological weapons, experimental materials, or technologies that needed to disappear. The sudden international cooperation, the military presence, the classification of samples, all consistent with finding something that both nations wanted to keep buried. Remember Operation Paperclip, the quiet absorption of dangerous knowledge, the programs that continued in the shadows long after official denials. What if Lake Vostok is where some of those programs ended up? Deep under the ice, out of reach, until someone started drilling. But there's a third possibility that researchers won't discuss in academic settings. The ice core chronology places Lake Vostok's isolation at over 15 million years. Long before modern humans, long before civilization as we understand it. What if something was already down there? Ancient structures detected by radar, magnetic signatures from materials that predate known metallurgy, biological samples that don't fit evolutionary timelines. For decades, Antarctica has produced anomalies that don't belong. Perfectly geometric formations visible from the air, heat signatures in regions with no geothermal explanation, radar returns that suggest voids where there should be solid ice. Most are dismissed, explained away as natural patterns, instrument errors, or misinterpretation. But Lake Vostok sits at the convergence of multiple anomalies. The size, the isolation, the magnetic readings, the biological material. What if the lake isn't just a body of water? What if it's a seal, containing something that went dormant long before recorded history? Something that left markers, structures, evidence. And what if drilling woke it up? The sample showing movement, the seismic rhythms that don't match geology, the sudden military interest from nations who've spent decades pretending Antarctica is just ice and penguins. It's not proof, but it's enough to get under your skin, enough to make you understand why they stopped.
It's not about what they found down there. It's about finding it changed. The people who worked at Vostok Station during those final seasons scattered afterward. Some returned to academic positions, and never spoke about Antarctica again. Others left science entirely. Dmitry, the glaciologist, moved to a different field. No more ice research, no more extremophile studies. When researchers try to follow up on Vostok, they hit walls. Data classified, samples unavailable, personnel transferred or unreachable. The drill hole remains sealed. No plans to resume, no public explanation beyond environmental concerns. But here's what's changed since they stopped. Antarctica has become increasingly militarized. Research stations with defensive capabilities. No-fly zones that weren't there before. International treaties that sound scientific but include language about strategic resources and controlled access. Lake Vostok is now under joint supervision, Russian and American oversight. Technically a scientific preserve, practically a quarantine zone. For those who remember when governments told us not to worry about nuclear testing, the pattern is recognizable. Secrecy framed as safety. Restriction framed as responsibility. But the truth tends to surface eventually. Files get declassified. Witnesses retire and talk. Technology improves and reveals what was hidden. The question isn't whether something is down there. The question is, what happens when we finally admit it? Because the drilling stopped, but the lake didn't go away. Whatever is sealed beneath 2 miles of ice is still there, still isolated, still waiting. And someone, somewhere, knows more than they're saying. Not because they want to keep secrets, but because they have to. Because some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. And maybe Lake Vostok is one of those doors. Maybe that's why after decades of drilling, after years of preparation, after coming within hundreds of feet of breakthrough, they stopped. Not because they couldn't continue, but because continuing meant facing whatever was down there. And someone decided we weren't ready for that.
In 2023, a database error at a Russian scientific archive briefly made internal drilling logs accessible. Before it was corrected, several researchers downloaded the files. One log entry described core samples from the deepest section, material labeled biologically active, notes about cellular movement observed in laboratory conditions, instructions to cease analysis pending military consultation. The files were online for less than 12 hours. Researchers who referenced them later found their access to Russian scientific databases revoked. No explanation, just sudden lockout. One of those researchers posted a screenshot on a geology forum before the thread was deleted. The image showed a single line from the log. Sample exhibits responsive behavior to thermal stimulus. Origin classification inconclusive. What was in the ice that responded to heat? And why does someone still care, decades later, about keeping it classified?